Pearl Harbor, the most vital U.S. naval base in the Pacific, became the target of one of the boldest surprise attacks in history. In less than 2 hours, more than 300 Japanese aircraft from 6 carriers unleashed bombs, torpedoes, and gunfire on Oahu. Airfields were destroyed, the battleship fleet crippled, and thousands of servicemen killed or wounded. That strike not only shook America's military pride, but also forced the United States to abandon neutrality and enter World War II. From the smoke and flames of Pearl Harbor, the global conflict took a decisive new turn. And now we will retrace the full course of the battle that awakened the sleeping giant, the United States, setting in motion its resurgence of power and the turning of the war. At dawn on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the skies over Hawaii glowed softly pink in peaceful stillness. At the U.S. naval base of Pearl Harbor on Oahu, most servicemen were still asleep or leisurely preparing for a day of rest. Meanwhile, more than 200 nautical miles to the north, a Japanese fleet of 6 aircraft carriers was silently cutting through the waves toward its target. On the flagship Akagi, Vice Admiral Kusaka ordered the hoisting of the battle flag marked with the characters Z, the same flag once flown in the legendary Battle of Tsushima. The early morning wind whipped the flag, a rallying symbol for the special strike force about to embark on the greatest battle of their lives. The sea was slightly rough that morning, ships swaying over 12 degrees, yet every safety protocol was cast aside. At exactly 6:20 a.m., the order was given. Take off. From the decks of the 6 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, waves of Japanese aircraft roared into the sky, engines shattering the calm dawn. A total of 183 planes, 0 fighters, Nakajima, B-5N Cape bombers armed with torpedoes and bombs, and Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers climbed into formation, a long V-shaped column heading straight for Oahu. Overhead, the strike force, led by Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, used cloud cover and low-altitude flight over the ocean to evade radar detection. Radio silence was absolute. Below, the targets remained quiet and unprepared. Not a single alarm had sounded. Earlier that morning, however, the Americans had caught faint signs of danger. The minesweeper USS Condor spotted a suspicious periscope offshore and reported it to the destroyer USS Ward. Not long after, Ward engaged and sank a small Japanese midget submarine attempting to infiltrate the harbor entrance, the very first shots fired by U.S. forces in World War II. Yet when the urgent message reached command, senior officers dismissed it as an isolated incident and chose not to raise a full-scale alert. And so, on that quiet Sunday morning, Pearl Harbor remained unprepared, unaware that catastrophe was only minutes away. At 7:02 a.m., at the Opana Point radar station on northern Oahu, 2 young soldiers on duty were stunned to see a massive cluster of signals appear on their screen, the unmistakable trace of a large formation of aircraft approaching the island. They immediately phoned Army Air Defense Headquarters, but the officer on duty that morning, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, still inexperienced in his post, assumed it must be the group of B-17 bombers scheduled to arrive from the mainland. In fact, 12 B-17s were indeed expected that day, and the radar signal coincided with their flight path. Convinced it was not an enemy threat, Tyler calmly ordered the warning dismissed. Don't worry about it. The 2 young radar operators hesitated but followed orders. They shut down the set and left for breakfast, unaware they had just missed the last chance to sound a full alert for the island. By 7:40 a.m., the coastline of Oahu came into view for the Japanese pilots of the first attack wave. The early morning clouds had suddenly cleared, revealing the vast expanse of Pearl Harbor below. Mitsuo Fuchida, commander of the strike force, could not hide his satisfaction. The weather was favoring them perfectly. Leading the formation, he guided his men toward the northwest of the island, just as planned. Through his bomb sight, the entire harbor lay exposed. Ford Island at the center, surrounded by the giant silhouettes of U.S. battleships moored tightly along the quays. Fuchida counted 8 in total, the full battleship strength of the Pacific Fleet resting at anchor. There were no torpedo nets in the water, no signs of emergency readiness. At 7:48 a.m., Fuchida switched on his radio and transmitted the long-awaited signal. "Tora, Tora, Tora!" 3 words that meant tiger, but here served as the code confirming total surprise had been achieved. At 7:49 a.m., the skies over Oahu lit up with the first flashes of fire. By 7:50, Lieutenant Commander Sakamoto's dive bomber squadron roared down on Wheeler Field, their bombs exploding with deafening force, tearing apart runways and hangars. Rows of P-40s and P-36s parked in the open erupted into flames, thick black smoke spiraling upward. American pilots and soldiers, jolted awake, rushed outside in confusion, only to see squadrons of Japanese planes marked with red suns plunging from above, unleashing relentless waves of bombs. Some desperately tried to drag planes to shelter, others used mattresses as makeshift shields while running onto the tarmac. But all efforts were futile as more bombs rained down. At the same time, other targets across the island came under attack. At Kaneohe on the eastern shore, Bellows in the southeast, and Ewa in the west, Japanese squadrons struck with fury. PBY Catalina seaplanes exploded on the water, their hulls shattered before sinking. Hangars shook violently, collapsing in flames. The entire island of Oahu was soon engulfed in thunderous blasts and columns of rising smoke. By 7:55, Pearl Harbor itself had become an inferno. Japanese torpedo planes skimmed the waves, releasing their weapons just above the surface. Deadly trails cutting straight toward the anchored U.S. battleships. Overhead, Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi's dive bombers struck Hickam Field. 250-kilogram bombs tore through hangar roofs, detonating in massive fireballs, destroying dozens of B-18 bombers. Nearby barracks were hit directly, flattening mess halls where soldiers had gathered for breakfast. Air raid sirens finally wailed, far too late. Survivors scrambled for weapons, but it was Sunday. Many gun positions stood locked, unmanned. In desperation, American soldiers grabbed whatever they could. Rifles, machine guns, even pistols, and fired back blindly into the sky. Tracers arced upward in thin, scattered lines, far too weak to stop the storm of steel and fire tearing Pearl Harbor apart. Within just 10 minutes, nearly all of Oahu's air bases were crippled. Wheeler, Hickam, Bellows, Awa, Kaneohe, Ford Island, everywhere echoed with explosions as smoke and flames filled the sky. Hundreds of American aircraft were destroyed where they stood, many incinerated before their engines ever started. PBY Catalina seaplanes were blasted apart on the water or destroyed in their hangars. On Ford Island, Navy pilots, stripped of their planes, grabbed pistols and rifles, firing back desperately from behind palm trees. Only a handful of P-40 and P-36s managed to take off from the auxiliary Halewa field, charging into hopeless dogfights. Despite the odds, the American pilots fought with valor, shooting down 11 Japanese aircraft. 2 young lieutenants, George Welch and Kenneth Taylor, stood out as early heroes of the U.S. Air Force, credited with 7 kills that morning. Yet such feats were far too small to alter the course of the battle. The skies over Oahu now belonged entirely to Japan. In the harbor, Japanese torpedo bombers turned on their primary targets, the U.S. battleships. USS Oklahoma was struck by at least 5 torpedoes, shuddered violently, rolled over and capsized, trapping hundreds of sailors inside. USS West Virginia took 7 torpedoes along her port side, flooding quickly and burning fiercely. Yet thanks to counter-flooding, she settled upright on the harbor floor rather than rolling over. The fleet flagship, USS California, was struck by torpedoes and a bomb, sinking within an hour and taking hundreds of men with her. USS Utah, an old battleship used for target practice, was mistaken for an active warship and torpedoed, rolling over beside Ford Island. The cruiser Helena, the mine layer Oglala, and several others were also struck, some sinking right there in the harbor. At 8:10 a.m., a massive explosion ripped through Pearl Harbor. The battleship USS Arizona had been struck by an 800-kilogram armor-piercing bomb dropped by Japanese high-level bombers. The bomb plunged deep into the forward magazine, detonating the stored powder charges. A towering column of fire and smoke shot skyward, lifting one of the ship's massive turrets before slamming it back down. The blast reverberated across the harbor, shaking the ground like an earthquake. When the smoke cleared, Arizona was broken in two, her bow engulfed in flames. More than 1,000 sailors, including Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd and Captain Franklin van Valkenburg, were killed almost instantly. From the distance, stunned witnesses could only cry out in disbelief. "They've sunk the Arizona!" Within just 15 minutes, 4 of America's battleships had been knocked out of action. Yet even amid catastrophe, acts of extraordinary bravery emerged. On board the stricken USS West Virginia, Mess Attendant Doris "Dory" Miller, a black sailor with no formal gunnery training, carried his mortally wounded captain to safety, then rushed back on deck. Spotting an unmanned .50 caliber machine gun, he seized it and opened fire, shooting down several Japanese planes before the ship sank beneath him. All across the harbor, chaos and valor intermingled. Rescue boats darted through burning oil slicks and floating wreckage to save survivors and fight fires. Tugboats rammed alongside burning ships, blasting them with hoses. From inside overturned hulls like the Oklahoma, trapped sailors pounded desperately on steel bulkheads, their faint signals mixing with the crackle of flames. On shore, naval doctors and nurses hastily turned nearby buildings into makeshift field hospitals. Sirens shouted orders, and the clash of metal filled the air as the Japanese assault raged on without pause. For a brief moment, many on Oahu believed the enemy had retreated. But at 8:54, the second wave struck. Nearly 170 Japanese aircraft swept in. Val dive bombers plunged at the surviving battleships. Kate bombers released high-level bombs on airfields and naval facilities, while Zero fighters strafed any anti-aircraft positions they spotted. This time, the Americans were more prepared. Anti-aircraft guns and machine guns opened up in unison, painting the sky with white bursts. A few Japanese planes were hit and fell into the sea, but most pressed through, dropping their bombs onto fresh targets. At 8:55, Japanese pilots locked onto Nevada and launched their attack. Bombs rained down, at least 5 250-kilogram hits tearing through her deck and superstructure. Flames engulfed the ship, her bow dipping low as water rushed in. To prevent her from sinking in the channel and blocking the harbor, the captain ordered her beached. At 9:10, Nevada ran aground at Hospital Point. On her decks, sailors fought back with everything they had, firing until their last rounds before flames forced them to abandon ship. The image of the Nevada, scarred and burning but with her flag still flying, became a tragic yet enduring symbol of American resolve on that fateful morning. At 9:30 a.m., another devastating blast shook the harbor. The destroyer USS Shaw, undergoing repairs in a floating dry dock, was hit by a direct bomb strike. Her bow erupted in a massive explosion, hurling steel skyward in a fireball, with fragments raining across the dockyard, piercing the roof of the naval workshops and killing or wounding many nearby sailors. Elsewhere, the cruiser USS Honolulu shuddered from a bomb detonation off her side, throwing men into the water. Smoke and fire swept through every corner of the harbor. Hickam Pier, the torpedo workshop, Army Air Force stations, all took hits. The city of Honolulu itself was spared direct bombardment, struck by only a single stray bomb, yet tragedy struck nonetheless. American anti-aircraft shells, fired in panic and falling back into residential districts, caused 68 civilian casualties, a bitter reminder of the chaos of that morning. Beneath the water, Japanese midget submarines also tried to join the battle. Beyond the one destroyed early by USS Ward, 4 others entered the fray. One ran aground, another slipped inside the harbor. At 8:17, USS Helm spotted and sank one near the entrance. At 8:30, another attempted to torpedo USS Curtis and USS Monaghan, but missed. Monaghan immediately rammed the intruder and finished it with depth charges. By the end of the attack, all 5 Japanese midget submarines had been sunk or disabled, failing to inflict major damage. At 9:45, after nearly 2 hours of relentless assault, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida ordered withdrawal. Gunfire gradually ceased, leaving only burning ships, smoldering wreckage, and black smoke choking the skies. Japanese squadrons regrouped west of Oahu before heading back to the fleet. Fuchida circled a while longer, taking reconnaissance photos, satisfied that no American aircraft had risen to oppose him. In just 90 minutes, the U.S. Pacific Fleet had suffered a catastrophe without precedent. Nearly 20 warships were sunk or heavily damaged. All 8 battleships at Pearl Harbor were hit. 4 sunk outright, with Arizona and Oklahoma lost beyond recovery, and 4 others badly crippled. 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and several smaller vessels were also wrecked. On airfields, 188 aircraft were destroyed, another 159 damaged, most still on the ground. The human toll was staggering. 2,403 service members and civilians killed, more than 1,100 wounded. The Arizona alone claimed 1,177 lives. Oklahoma lost 429, West Virginia 106, California 100, Nevada 60, Utah 64. That morning marked the greatest loss of life in U.S. history up to that point, and the first time in nearly 150 years that American territory had been struck so directly by a foreign power. Japan's losses were far lighter compared to the devastation they inflicted. Only 29 planes failed to return, 9 in the first wave, 20 in the second, with about 70 others damaged and needing repair. All 5 midget submarines were destroyed or lost, with 9 crewmen killed and 1 captured, the first Japanese prisoner of war in World War II. In total, Japan lost just 55 men. Flush with victory, officers like Fuchida and Genda urged Vice Admiral Nagumo to launch a 3rd strike, targeting the massive U.S. fuel depots, dry docks, and repair yards left untouched. Such a blow, they argued, would cripple the Pacific Fleet for much longer than sinking battleships. But Nagumo hesitated. He feared losing the element of surprise, did not know the whereabouts of the American carriers, and worried about counterattacks if the fleet lingered. After brief deliberation, he ordered withdrawal. At 1 p.m. on December 7th, the Japanese task force turned west and sailed home, leaving behind critical American infrastructure intact, a strategic mistake historians would later emphasize. News of the disaster spread quickly across the nation and the world. Shock gave way to outrage. On December 8th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress, calling December 7th a date which will live in infamy, and declared war on Japan. Within 24 hours, the United States had entered World War II with the determination to crush militarism. The attack had delivered a staggering blow, but it also awoke a sleeping giant. Pearl Harbor became a turning point in history, a tragedy, but also a rallying cry. Amid smoke and tears, the United States united, transforming grief into strength and preparing for total war. The stars and stripes flying defiantly above burning wreckage that morning became a solemn vow. America would not forget, and America would strike back.